For today's purposes, since Congressman Case's schedule is a bit pressing, instead of starting with the FAA presentation, I guess what we'd like to do at this point is offer an opportunity for you, Congressman, to sort of jump the line and share your most current thinking with the task force members and the participants assembled.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate your accommodation of my schedule. It's we're in the middle of a busy 2 weeks, so I was holding my breath as to whether I would be able to say anything by 5 o'clock, and maybe you shouldn't have let me cut the line. So here we are. COVID-19, at least so far, is eroding. We're up over 30,000 visitors again per day. Therefore you're all up there and flying again, which from a business perspective is great, but from a perspective of community disruption is kind of like deja vu all over again. And my sense is that really nothing has changed over the last number of years, except for the time in which you didn't fly and we didn't have tourists. And so that begs the obvious question of, kind of where do we go from here? A lot of talk, a lot of, I think, goodwill. I think, we're trying to reach accommodations, but the concerns from my constituents and others throughout the state remain. I would characterize the issues in a couple of different ways. I would just put them on the table with you. I think, first of all, of course, there's still substantial community disruption as you increase your frequency of flying. You are flying frequently, which is itself an issue, and obviously that's your business model, but there's a difference between one helicopter going overhead in the morning and 30, 50, 75, and that's one of the problems here. Time is certainly a question. I think there had been a little bit of an understanding that tour helicopters would not fly before certain hours and after certain hours, and my observation and anecdotally listening to folks that follow this is that to a large extent that is followed, but unfortunately you have within your industry people that don't comply with understandings and don't seem to understand that when you fly and how often you fly is almost more important than where. And speaking of where, certainly the routes are fairly uniform. You are technically, for example, talking today about East Honolulu and Waimanalo and trying to have a discussion as to that part of the state. Again, anecdotally, personal observation, again, the route goes right over Hawaii Kai, over Kalama Valley, rather than out to sea, as you were doing for a while, then comes back right over Waimanalo. So the routes are pretty uniform. And so I guess that's great for the places that you're not flying over anymore, such as Kailua for the most part. Not so great for everybody else because that just adds to the frequency. There are continued compliance rules. Many of you turn on your ATSBs and can be identified not just by location, but by actual ID number, which I think I would hope we would agree would be kind of a basic in terms of facilitating community complaints and following what you do. But it appears that some of your members don't feel compelled to do that, even if they're not legally compelled to do that. And so that's unfortunate. And then finally, the altitude rules continue to be skirted and broken. Many of the altitude rules do stay above 1,500 feet above ground level, but again, on any given day, that's not uniform. So the issues are all still out there. I would add to the issues that with the FAA's and perhaps with their agreement, apparent abandonment of the Air Tours Common Procedures manual, which, as the FAA says very frontally, is not intended to address community disruption. It's just intended to address, kind of safety related issues in terms of ensuring that your terrain is a certain way and you don't run into each other. But nonetheless, it did function to some extent as some kind of a control on community disruption. And of course, that is now being abandoned. I don't agree with that myself, but I was willing to give the FAA the benefit of the doubt as to the replacement mechanism, which of course was to set the rule and then allow deviations from that under conditions. I don't know where the FAA is. I've been briefed by the FAA a number of times already in the last year, and it doesn't seem that that's making any progress. So there's nothing to comment on quite yet. And I really don't know whether that is going to be an effective replacement mechanism to address any particular part of this concern. I appreciate your invitation, Melissa, to come with you and witness noise somewhere, and I probably will take you up on that when I get home. But I will also say to you that just because I stand in a location, or anybody else for that matter, and watches a helicopter go over at 1,500 feet and listens and hears a modicum of noise, that's not the problem. The problem is volume, frequency, and time of operation and route. It's additive. It's not a single helicopter going overhead, which I think would not bother a lot of people, but it's the rest of that. And so, kind of where are we? I'm glad that you're going to get clarification from the Attorney General, because there are a number of bills in the legislature again this time around, which either the industry and or the Attorney General objected to on the grounds of federal preemption. So it's important that we get that cleared up. I certainly would like to get that answer once and for all, because I think the state has a broader zone of regulation than maybe the state thinks it has, and I'm certainly trying to accomplish that in the U.S. Congress, just to be straight with everybody. I haven't given up on that. I think the state should be able to regulate in these areas. And so I'm pursuing these efforts here in Congress statutorily. I also got some, pursuing it in reports from the FAA to try to narrow in on some of the issues that we seem not to be on the same page on in terms of the facts. But the bottom line is I appreciate the continued discussion, the continued sensitivity, but I despair that the basics of what you want to do, which is fairly unfettered discretion to fly when, where, and how you want, is inconsistent with protecting the public. And so unless some kind of self-regulation in that area is available, that impacts all of the industry, not just the good players such as you that are genuinely trying to look forward to, but also, and I will say this, the rogue players that just want to do whatever they want to do and don't want to be hampered by community discussions. We're not going to solve this problem, but the discussion is important, and there's steps that we can still take. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to provide some input, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Congressman, for your heartfelt remarks. Are there any questions that are top of mind for you with respect to the clarification of local jurisdiction versus federal that we might bring up with the AG when that occurs?
Sure. I think I think that the AG has, there's kind of two zones of regulation. I would call them direct regulation and indirect regulation. I think that direct regulation would be when, where, and how you use the airspace, the actual airspace. And so, can you fly at 5 a.m. in the morning, 5 a.m.? Can you fly over Kailua? Can you deviate, below 1,500 feet? And if so, under what conditions? When you're actually using the airspace over the state, it seems to me fairly clear, unfortunately, by the way, from my perspective, but that airspace is controlled by the feds, and that the state or the local governments cannot tell you when you can or can't do that. However, there's a zone of regulation on the ground that may well be linked to your operations. For example, we had what I thought was a good, solid piece of legislation, which, by the way, some of your members have talked to me about as necessary, which would require higher levels of insurance coverage by tour helicopter operators for safety concerns, and also to ensure that where there was injury, that there was actual availability of resources to compensate people who are hurt or die in airplane accidents. And that bill got all the way to conference, and as far as I understand it, I think that was a permissible level of regulation. It was related to the public safety. It was not specifically limiting your freedom in the skies. And from your perspective, I think many of your perspectives, not all of your perspectives, that was necessary to kind of weed out the fly-by-night operators who are giving you a bad name by and large. And yet the industry, I believe, objected to that bill passing. If I got that incorrect, then I stand to be corrected. So that's an area specifically, like what conditions can be attached for ground operations? Can there be insurance requirements? Can there be the stricter requirements on corporate locus of operations, bonds, conditions of can the Department of Land and Natural Resources actually condition the availability of base operations on state lands around a certain set of understandings that relate to the public welfare? Those are the areas that I think need clarification.
I think I'm glad this is a recorded session because there are a lot of things that you've mentioned there, but it certainly gives us an appreciation of how you're thinking about it. And I think we'll make more productive the interactions between DOT airports and AG to get that clarification. The good